1 second, I'll put on my headphones on.
Hi, welcome everybody. We're going to give people a couple more minutes to file in, and then we'll get started. We're thrilled you're here.
You'd agree that part of the joy of this is just seeing so many people you haven't seen in a long time. It's like, oh my goodness, look at them. That was great. Yeah, Ari, I was talking
Absolutely.
to you too.
Yep.
Akiva and Amanda.
Of course, I knew you were talking about me.
Oh, Bob Mullen. I mean, I'm going through it. The only shame is that you can't see everyone at once.
Right. I guess if you had a screen big enough.
We did that on our big screen TV earlier today for a cousin's reunion, and we had it was awesome.
Yeah. So many familiar faces. And
yeah, it's great. Yeah, isn't it wild? So many folks we haven't seen in so long. Although, Rabbi, we're doing some parts of our davening by Zoom. We're not constituting a full minyan, but we have been gathering regularly. So I wonder, maybe for you, it's even more because you're seeing people who you really haven't seen in a while.
Yeah, even there's also Zoom, and I'm teaching Daf Yomi on Zoom. And there's definitely some of that. But
right.
There's a lot of people I haven't seen in a long time.
Right.
I don't remember the last time I saw Peggy Dorf, but I see her now, and that's fantastic.
Peggy was like first in the gate there.
I think she was eager to see me too. And who knew that Craig Burns' beard is so big now?
Yeah, he's been cultivating it.
Yeah. Or that Razel Gilman goes by Razel Gilman. I mean, there's so many great things going on. It's fantastic.
Razel Gilman, I have to tell you, the food, that shepherd's pie was unbelievable. Thank you so much. You really hooked us up. All right, I'll give people just like another minute, and then we're going to jump in. I want to respect your time, but I do know that sometimes with Zoom meetings, as people know, there are some folks for whom it's a little less familiar, and it takes them a few iterations to break through the various technological walls dividing them from us. So just want to make sure. We've got 70 people registered, so just give people a few more minutes to get in. We've got a couple more minutes to get in.
Wonderful.
I'll be right back.
There's so many wonderful faces. It's great.
70
Aki and Deborah,
Great.
Erica, Joel. Just fantastic. The Finkles. It's great. Oh.
Okay,
Jacob,
Rabbi, what do you think? Should we start?
Oh, whenever you want. I mean, I'm
Okay.
enjoying this. I'm having a good time already.
Right. This would be a good program. Like, let's just hang out and just look at people's faces and say, "Oh, it's so good to see you."
Yeah,
That
l'chaim.
would be
Just
great.
seeing each other.
Right.
This is the Brady Bunch next week's program.
Right. This would be a crazy Brady Bunch. Bruchim Habaim, welcome and good evening. I'm Rabbi Josh Rose. I know many of the beautiful faces on our screen, but not all of them. First, I want to acknowledge that I know that folks who are members of my community are laughing right now because they have not seen me wear one of these in a very long time. In the post quarantine world, I've taken it down a few notches, but I knew, I was like, there is exactly 0.0% chance that Rabbi Fischer will not be wearing a tie. And
I'll take my jacket off just to match.
right. Thank you. You're going down a level. I'm going up a level. It's good now. Right. So
There, Akiva, this is really for you.
so what I want to say is that first of all, I want to begin by thanking Rabbi Fischer for taking time to do this. And actually, though I initiated this particular round to get us, up and going for tonight's conversation, it really was Rabbi Fischer's idea several months ago. He reached out to me and said, "Hey, let's do a thing." And what exactly the thing was going to be wasn't clear. We kicked around some ideas, and we both loved the idea of putting together a program where we could talk and share and bring our communities together. So I also want to thank Rabbi Fischer for that initial spark that ultimately brought about tonight's event. So let me tell you a little bit about what we hope to do tonight, and then I want to offer a very, very brief reflection, and then we'll get started. Really, tonight is the word theology has this kind of formal tenor to it. And I have studied theology and then kind of left behind the formal study of theology, and recently I've kind of returned to it. But more than anything, tonight is, I think, what Rabbi Fischer and I both really want is an organic conversation of two people seeking understanding from one another and trying to highlight differences and points of contact and commonality. And so we're really going to be talking about the thing that is central in both of our lives and probably the lives of everybody here, which is Torah, mitzvah, and our questions about our relationship to Hashem and how Jewish lives play out in the context of our very complicated lives. And so there probably will be certain moments where we kind of address some of the classical theological questions, and some of them may emerge more organically from just the kinds of, from wherever the conversation goes. The second thing I'll say about tonight is that this is the first time that Rabbi Fischer and I have engaged in a dialogue in this setting. And, there's a warm Hamish relationship between the two of us. And I told him that I want to make sure that, obviously the entire, I jokingly said to somebody in describing this that it was going to be a theological steel cage death match, but I was kidding, because really what we want is to be the opposite of that. However, I also want us to push one another, and to really seek understanding. So, I hope that you all can keep us honest. And if we kind of gloss over difficult parts of the conversation that you feel like are really worthy of more depth, then you'll let us know that. We will make time for questions and for people to jump in, and you can either ask both of us or you can direct a question to one or the other of us over the course of the evening. I wanted to begin, just as I have with all of the classes and gatherings that I've had over the course of this week, just simply by naming what's happening in our country right now, not with the goal of getting political, but I think it as we all know, to be a Jew is to live in the world and to struggle with and to make holiness out of the world around. And so it seems like it's worth just acknowledging that there's something extraordinary happening in our country. Sometimes there are moments of hopefulness, and sometimes there may be anxieties and fears. And I just wanted to share, and then I'm going to just ask Rabbi Fischer if he has any has any thoughts about the extraordinary protests and all of the speeches and yearnings that we've heard voiced on TV. I'm feeling extraordinarily hopeful. Not to deny what an incredibly difficult time it's been, but and of course, all of the violence early on in the thing and just the general sense of chaos can be unnerving. But I feel like there's an opportunity for me personally and for the country to really begin to wrestle with some questions, no matter where you come down politically, to wrestle with some questions that I think for too long we've not really wanted to wrestle with, that have to do with race in America. So I feel hopeful about that opportunity, and just wanted to see, Rabbi Fischer, if there's anything you wanted to offer before we kind of dive into our conversation.
Yeah, to echo what you're saying, I'm feeling hopeful, but I wanted to focus on what that hopefulness is. The essence of living as the height of a human is the choice is making choices and action. And for too long, issues were spoken about, but there was no action. And I feel like we're at the cusp of action, positive action, and that's the hope. And I think that's the essence of Tzelem Elokim, and the image of God is the ability to make choice and of choices. And I think that on a micro level within various communities, and on a macro level over the whole in the country and people, making positive choices and is what I think is emerging, I hope is emerging, and that is very powerful and very hopeful.
Yeah. Okay. Yasher Koach. Thank you. Thank you for that. Powerful, important choices we have in front of us. That is absolutely clear. And I wouldn't be surprised if the topic comes up again, and perhaps we'll feel it out and see if maybe we get into a little more depth. But that's not the stated conversation for tonight. But I'll tell you what. Let me use that as a bridge to a broader question I have. Again, not necessarily about the events of the last week, but more broadly, I think that one of the questions that every rabbi has to deal with, and I think every Jewish community has to deal with, is the relationship between contemporary events, and that doesn't necessarily mean like the latest political controversy, but some ongoing, for example, let's see, school funding, the issue of school funding in the city, or gun control. Let's not dive into that topic, but I'm just saying, as a topic that's kind of ongoing interest to Americans. How do you navigate as a Jew and then also as a rabbi, and maybe those are separate in terms of this question? Should Judaism have something to say about what's going on in the public square? How do you think about that question?
I definitely think that Judaism has something to say about what's happening in the public sphere and square, and it's an essential part of my connection to Torah, is an ability to look back at the text and look back at the Torah and look back at teachings and look back at Tehillim. What do the songs of Tehillim say about events of the world, and how to face them, whether it's the courage needed to grow or how to look at challenges. Mishnah, Talmud, Halacha are very much involved in that as well. And sometimes it's very unclear as to what they say. And sometimes to me it's very frustrating, where to me it seems like it's clear what the Torah says, and people are looking at it and finding it in a very very different way. I'll keep it less political, or I think we can all agree on something that we can all agree. There's a website somebody sent me probably about 5-6 years ago that collected all of the sermons that happened in the 1850s and 60s in the United States around slavery. All the rabbinic sermons in the United States, and all of the drashas that were pro the South, and all those that were abolitionists.
Wow.
And it was so profound to me to see that the use of Torah in a context like that, and really everybody taking one line, and this is the one that supports me. And we're not going to delve into gun control, but the concept that Torah speaks about gun control per se, to me is foreign, because that's a political question of how to best deal with an issue. Does the Torah speak about life, preserving life? Absolutely. Right. But exactly how to do it, now we're already navigating something else. And so to me, it absolutely sheds light and directs so much of the interaction with the world. And so much of it is not of explicit Torah, and really is going to depend on so much information and need for knowledge.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you're pointing out that, clearly the Torah does not have a position on the Second Amendment. It does have a position on, human beings hurting each other and violence. And as you said, then you begin to get into details on policy. But it is interesting, right? Nobody would say that, well, the rabbis in the 1860s, understandably, some of them came down in favor of slavery and some of them didn't. You can never tell. Like, you and I would agree, like, maybe there's some issues, and I'm not saying we should enumerate them tonight, but there are some issues in which you would, well, I guess let me just ask you, like, do you feel like there are some issues where you would just have to say, as a rabbi, if this issue came up, the Torah clearly doesn't address this, but I have to talk about this issue in political terms tonight?
There are. I mean, we started off our conversation about that. Although the Torah does speak to our responsibility collectively, to the obligation of having a just system within, and this is one of the 7 mitzvahs that don't pertain to Jews alone. This is to have a just system and justice within the city. So that definitely, the need for justice is a part of something that we can agree on, and whether the nuance is something that, or the particular manifestation in this time is something that maybe the Torah does not particularly address. Overall, that is something that we would start such a conversation with by saying we cannot ignore the fact that great injustice happened 10 days ago. Great injustice is, it has happened too much, and the responses need to be us collectively standing up for justice and making sure that things happen. Action. So these are, I think, sometimes, to your question, it's an absolute necessity to apply Torah and to apply Torah to the times, but sometimes if it doesn't directly speak to something, it informs the general information. I want to quote one quote from Rabbi Hirsch in one of the first letters of his 19 letters, which is he wrote by himself, but it's a dialogue between it's his created dialogue between someone questioning Torah and the responses. And
hold on, just wait 1 second, just because I want to let people know that the Rabbi Hirsch, that Rabbi Fischer is quoting this book, 19 Letters, as one of the foundational works of like modern Orthodoxy. So that's the context of who we're talking about.
Yeah, 1850 Germany. Yeah. So and he writes that Torah properly people properly informed by Torah will bring about a just and better world for everybody. Right. That I'm paraphrasing, but that idea. Yeah. And I think even if it doesn't address a particular thing, I look back and I try to get inspiration from Torah to bring it to the modern questions.
Yeah. So I really like that idea that you said in the context of what's happening currently. If you look at it through the broad lens of justice, that you're saying, and some people may have missed this, so I just want to draw it out. You're saying that the Noahide laws themselves, that is the laws that that the Jewish people say are incumbent upon all people. That is, it's not an aspect of the specific covenant with the Jewish people, but these are laws that God says are incumbent upon all human beings. That that the requirement that there be justice or a system of justice, not justice defined by content but by process. You're saying that that's a way for us to think about what's going on right now in the country. Yeah, that's very interesting.
And let me throw that back at you. And how
Yeah.
do you apply Torah where Torah doesn't address particular
Right.
issues, but
Yeah, it's a great question. And by the way, we're kind of dancing around the politics. Rabbi Fischer did assure me that he will end tonight's discussion with his endorsement for the 2020 political race. So we have that to look forward to. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
you wait for it.
So yeah, I well, listen, first of all, I think
Is
another
Roxborough an option?
I don't think so, not anymore.
Okay.
Look, I think that perhaps something else that we'll get into is the ways in which our individual biographies shape the Jew that we are and the rabbi that we are. And so, I cannot answer that question without reflecting on my own upbringing and my own Abba of blessed memory. But I'll talk about that in a moment, but I often share with people the idea that connected to how much our personal upbringing is inextricably bound with our understanding of Torah and mitzvah, by talking about the fact that it's not a mistake that the Torah opens with the book of Bereshit, which is a story about families and all of their complex dynamics, because I think there's an analogy, like just as Genesis becomes a framework for that is the stories of Genesis become a framework for understanding the larger story that then unfolds in Exodus, so too in our own lives do our family dynamics shape how we understand our relationship to Torah. So to answer your question, for anyone who's been in Portland for any amount of time, you'll know that my father was not exactly a political wallflower, and he was quite outspoken on a huge range of issues, very often, I would say largely inspiring people and, not infrequently infuriating people. And, my father, his understanding of social justice was just the phrase that he would use in the context of Yiddishkeit, in the context of his words on the Bima, stood very, very strongly, meaning the bulk of the weight of it was from the Nevi'im, from the prophetic tradition. And so it's interesting because my learning has focused much more, and my focus has been much more on Chumash and on that's where I spend most of my that's been the source of my spiritual nourishment. But I think that for my father, the prophets and their vision of a society that is actually living the values and avoiding hypocrisy in the way that some of those ringing passages from Isaiah and Jeremiah and call out to us, that was how I grew up, was hearing that. However, and I think that, people's memories are short. So my guess is my congregants may most remember what I've said over the last, few months to a year. But the truth is, I have not been a rabbi who speaks about politics very often. I mean, I've chosen my moments, but until this past year, for reasons that are probably beyond the scope of the conversation, if not gotten into politics, not out of a sense of, I guess more than anything, it's just not where my focus was. It's not what I felt like the communities that I was in needed to hear and learn. And so in some ways I was very much an opposite of my father, I cherish him. I cherish his memory and the ways that he shaped me. But as a rabbi toiling in the works of Torah, I was not very political. But to get and now that's changed a little bit. 99% of what I teach on a Shabbos is not about politics. But I would say with increasing frequency, I am referring to the world of politics. So to get to your question, how do I address things that are not explicitly addressed in the Torah? Look, for me, it's not a process that you may follow, although I'm not 100% sure, but it's not that I turn first to the halacha and then say, like, where does halacha come down on this issue? That I might extrapolate to the current circumstance. More often, I am turning to a kind of a broader ethos within the Torah that I think speaks to what's happening. And I'll give an example. I just wrote a letter to my congregation about recent events, and I said, like, this is something that we have to really be concerned with. This is a moment for us to stand up as allies to the African American community, and their concern with what it means to be Black in America has to be our concern. And the leg I was standing on in terms of Torah was really the story of when we're first introduced to Moshe as a person who's going out into the world. And I pointed out that, first that Moshe witnesses brutality being done to an Israelite by an Egyptian. And then he intervenes when two Israelites are battling among themselves. And very often that's what people remember, those two moments. But of course, that phase of his life is not over until he then goes and he intervenes on behalf of the Midianite women when they're being sort of assailed by people. And that's a conflict in which neither he nor the Jewish people have any stake. And it's only after that Hashem manifests at the burning bush. And so I used that. My point is not to argue those verses and to persuade people one way or the other, but I turned to that story rather than any specific halachic prescription to say, we too have to be concerned with and extend our love to people who are beyond the boundaries of the Jewish world. So
I concur, and really I think as well when there's a general ethos that I glean from Torah and having studied Torah and being involved in Torah enough that I get a sense, I hope, of something that the Torah would want me to do in a certain time and moment. My concern often when it comes to politics or political issues is, how do I know, and it's something that I struggle with, and I wonder if you have something that this comes up for you. So how do I know what's my personal politics versus what is something I think is a true ethos glean from the ethos of Torah, something that's really I can say, oh, this is a Torah idea. This is my Yiddishkeit idea. Versus this is Tzvi Fischer's political idea.
Right.
And he's Tzvi Fischer's politics.
Right. I think that is such a beautiful, beautiful question. But let me. I'm not going to answer it, but I do have the answer. I'm just not going to share it with you. But I want to ask, is that desirable? Is it possible? Like, would Moshe have been Moshe without Moshe having been Moshe? Like, could Moshe have been Moshe without his particular narrative and his particular individuality? You know what I mean? Is it possible, first of all, to totally separate in the way that is an assumption of your beautiful question, to separate your views from what we might call things that are authentic to the Torah? And if so, is it desirable to do that? Aren't we losing some humanity if we look at the Torah as a thing that we sort of need to take from the outside and import into our heads in order to inform us?
Well, I find it desirable on account of, because I find we sometimes are caught up in our personal wants and maybe our
Right.
communal ideas.
Yep.
We are fickle people.
Yep.
I talk of myself. Everybody else on this screen is amazing, but it is very possible that we have a want and need, and all of a sudden that becomes a real perspective.
Yeah.
And I can see all of Torah that way. If the Civil War can have drash about abolition versus
Right.
Versus slavery, that tells me, and I brought that up because I do think that it's possible that someone has blinders on.
Yeah.
And so I do always struggle with, I have my political bent. Many people know this. I'm not shy about it, that I'm a libertarian, small L. I come from a place of skepticism of anybody in power, because power can corrupt, and there's a lot of money and there's a lot of investment and all sorts of stuff. So I come from a place of skepticism around that, but I'm always concerned. So am I addressing something that is of much greater importance than my own political bent and my political perspective?
Yep.
And is that informing it?
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
so if you ask Tzvi Fischer for a political prediction or a political choice, that's one thing. But if you're asking Rabbi Tzvi Fischer,
Yeah.
tell me something about what Torah can inform me about this, I struggle looking back at this and saying, okay, when it comes to politics, am I able to reflect not my own personal style, but which will come in any case, but can I try and go into the depth of Torah?
Absolutely. And I have a close friend of mine is on this call. I'm not going to call him out, but he and I were talking about this recently, and I was saying to him that this very question is I can't overstate its importance to me, its significance to me. And when I say this question, I mean that deliberately, which is to say, I don't know where I land on this, because I go back and forth, because I think what you are articulating is so, so important, which is, all of us have seen, and I'm sure all of us have been guilty of, but, I have seen, in various websites I go to and blogs that I read, religious leaders and rabbis as well, clearly imposing themselves in an almost unapologetic way on the text, right? Saying that the Torah supports gun control, just to take that example. And I will own, by the way, I am in favor of gun control. We're not going to talk about that tonight, although we keep saying we're not going to talk about it and it keeps coming up. But I would never, to me, it would be ludicrous to say that the Torah addresses gun control and that it comes clearly down in favor of this legislation that is up in front of the Senate next year, right? And I really, really don't like that when religious leaders do that. And more than that, so now let me kind of depoliticize this, because I want to talk now about in my own religious journey, why this question is so important. So as you know, I grew up in a non-halachic context, and as an adult Jew, I sort of worked my way towards a halachic system, right? So now that I'm a rabbi in a conservative shul, we don't have to get into the fact that for a lot of folks in the Orthodox community, the conservative halakha does not kind of hold up. Set that aside. I oriented my life towards a halachic system, and really the core reason I did that, part of it was aesthetic, what I mean by that is part of it was just, I found over time, I just had a preference for being around that world and that energy, and the davening that I loved, I realized I tended to be in more traditional communities. So part of it was aesthetic, but on a deeper level, on a level of really wrestling with Torah, it came from that issue that you raised, is if I am just doing Jewishly whatever interests me, then why do I need the Torah? You know what I'm saying? Like if I want to grow as a person, I need to find where are the limits of what I'm yearning for. What are the limits of my own worldview? And if I want to transcend that, there needs to be something coming from outside of me that is challenging me and saying, no, just because you think X does not mean X. And of course, that led me on a whole path where, so now my observed Jewish life is so different from what I grew up with. And I think that, to me, that is at the core of what halakha and mitzvah present us with, a challenge in a good way to transcend our own assumptions. But as I said, I really wrestle with this, and I'm ambivalent about it, because I also think that the idea that we can completely divest ourselves of and divest our own egos, and that we can get to this idea that there is a raw, unsullied, perfectly neutral text of Torah that we can import into our heads. I think that that's an illusion. And I don't know, I have not figured out as a person and as a Jew how to bridge that gap. I know I'm getting a little out there and philosophical here, but I think you can hear what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I want to concur with that, and maybe in this segment of what we're talking about with that, I want to concur that I don't think we can divest that, and I don't think the Torah Hashem wants us to divest that, because we all have our personal midos and our personal, our attributes, our inclinations, our tendencies, and those are going to inform even the way we see Torah and we learn, right, and the halacha that we see, and the influence of the ethos that you spoke about that it gives us, and I think those are authentic to Torah. Lo b'shamayim he means that the Torah is not in heaven. It is for us to try, and with our personality and our and who we are and the times we live in, to try and look at the Torah and glean from there. So I don't think we can divest from that, but I tried to divest Second Amendment or constitutional law or personal, personal, or a zeitgeist from that, and that's the part I think is a struggle. But I agree with you, and to me, one of the beauties of halacha and Torah is that it isn't just what feels right to me, because what feels right to me is going to vary depending on how much I slept last night. Right. It really is always dependent on that external dominant factor. That my core belief that I'm a creation of Hashem, the divine creator who willed this world for a purpose. I'm a part of that purpose. Right. Torah is the message for me to live out that purpose. Right. And my deep connection to that as my God. Right.
Okay, beautiful. So I'm going to put just a little chatima on that, not to get in the last word, but because I don't want it to always sound like oh yeah, we're all agreeing. So what I think is the difference is, I think you're more confident that you can delineate the boundary there than I am, and I think where precisely we draw the line is one of the profound meaning between myself and the Torah. What's in the Torah and what's in me is one of the great, at this point I would say, unsolved mysteries of Jewish life, and one of the most profound paradoxes and great difficulties for me. I do think that there's a lot of overlap there, but an interesting difference. Okay, now can I move us in a new direction? All right.
I'm your guest.
So what I want to say, what I want to ask, and it certainly brushes up against this. Maybe what we've just been talking about is sort of a natural parent to this topic, which is, okay, if we acknowledge that cultures vary and change over time, right, as they obviously do, is evident to anybody who's ever read anything from the past.
Or anybody that's met their grandparents.
Yeah, right. Good point. Right. Or anybody who's lived, more than a few years, right, and has looked back. Right. Good point. It's self-evident. How do you? Well, I'm going to put it like this. I'm not going to pretend I'm phrasing some objective question. I wrestle with the fact that there are some core ethical issues that are extraordinarily pressing, that I'll just say have to do with my view of feminism, which I'm not going to pretend is the only view of feminism, and things that have to do with sexual identity, right? And how I wrestle with the fact that there is a framework, a halachic framework, from a culture that was formulated a couple of thousand years ago. It's our culture. It's magnificent and brilliant in so many ways, but it had a set of assumed values that we're using to make decisions about inclusion and what's permitted and not permitted within Jewish life. And for me, it's not like therefore the entire system doesn't work and we shouldn't be following the rabbis. But I'm pointing to a few core issues where like human dignity is at stake and where the weight on people's lives is enormous. Do you ever? How do you think about that question, that we're using this ancient framework in ways that sometimes damage people's lives? Or is that an unfair question?
It's not an unfair question. Every question is a fair question. The question is, I think, asserts, at least the way you framed the last bit of the question, asserts something that I think is unfairly placing the damage to people's lives on one particular aspect of the greater question of whatever the zeitgeist or the issue may be, that's saying, well, it's an ancient Torah or an ancient halacha that is really the barrier and the difficulty here. Because it isn't, because I cannot think of one thing that is only an issue within the community that adheres to Torah and not an issue in any other community or any other culture outside of Torah. And therefore, the fact.
Wait. Put a little meat on the bones there. Help me understand.
So say your version of feminism, which you felt was the ancient halacha, the ancient culture, informing that is oppressive, or I think you said damages people very real today. We can't really assert that it's that creates the damage, because this exists outside of Torah as well. Whatever you're seeing is rarely, I cannot think of one thing that would be specific to the Torah observant community and say that's the only place this manifests. And the halachic observance community is the only place this issue manifests.
Sure.
And therefore,
sure.
It must be Torah that is, or halacha that is creating that injury.
Right. Interesting.
So therefore, I think it's multi-layered, and where the hurt or where the issue lies is layered within many. And if we had to unpack any one issue, and we can probably sit hours on any one of those issues just to get to where the underlying difficulties are. Yeah. But I think it would be unfair to say it stems from Torah. But I'll tell you that I do. Yeah. I don't want to say I struggle with, but here's how I deal with. How does Torah inform something like that? So to me, I start with Torah as the will of the divine, the creator of the universe. So a living organism, a being within the world of Torah, is really informed by the maker. And so my struggle is always, my inclination is not that way. And I look at something and I think it shouldn't be that way, but yet it seems like halacha or Torah says it that way.
Right.
Now, why does Torah say that when, to me, I don't think I could do that. I'll give you something very benign. I think we can all relate to this. The killing Amalek. It's something that is so difficult for me to understand. Why would the Torah want me to do that? To kill a nation? But that's, the Torah says, the Amalekites have to be wiped out. Could I actually do that? I cannot imagine it. But it's in the Torah, so I struggle with that. And so how do I deal with it? Okay, could I fight Nazis? Yeah, I could. My grandfather was a partisan fighter in Yugoslavia and blew up buildings that had Nazis, soldiers sleeping in them, right? I'm proud of that in a certain sense. But he created loss of life.
Right.
It was a real struggle.
Yeah.
But to me, my struggle is not that it's an ancient thing, because I think it's very modern. I think I see people living halacha in a very modern way in the modern world, connected to the modern world, with a lot of compassion for all sorts of people, with great deal of integration, and yet a true sense of halacha as informing them. So the struggle is real in that. At times they come to a head and they're painful and they're hard. But for me, the struggle is limited to, I don't understand why that would be the will of the divine, but it does. But I do see it as the will.
Got it. Okay. So let me refine the question a little bit. So that was beautiful and clear, and I understand what you're saying. Let me separate this out for a moment, because I shouldn't have thrown the feminism in there, because it's a more complicated question. And in a sense, for me, feminism is actually in a separate category, because I know that there are Orthodox feminists, and I also know that not only is the halachic, in my mind, the halachic model of gender relations very beautiful. In addition to that, I know that that many women find it so and opt to engage in it, obviously, right? That goes without saying. I guess what I think, now that I'm hearing you talk, what really is behind my question is, I think that the issue of sexual identity, homosexuality, and relationships between gay men and women, and issues having to do with people who are trans, I guess for me that puts a finer point on it, and I guess that's what I wrestle with, because it's one. I guess I'm curious about how you think about that. And to be clear, I'm not trying to like put you on the spot and make you the defender of halacha. I'm just asking you how you wrestle with these, there are people whose hearts are broken, and you're your own religious convictions and commitments, and you're a big-hearted person, so how do those come together? That's really what I'm asking. And to be clear, I'm not saying that these issues only exist in halakha. Of course, they're evident everywhere, but a lot of people have. I think what distinguishes it is that for a lot of people, they've realized that their homophobia was just sort of a cultural artifact. I'm talking about people who are not religious Jews, just to use an example. They realized it was a cultural artifact. There was like, oh, I guess there's no good reason for me to be biased against these people. And so as you know, many people in our country and throughout European nations have change their attitudes. So to the extent that countries are embracing gay marriage and totally normalizing it. But when you have a religious commitment that tells you that there are boundaries around that and limits to how normalizing you will allow this phenomenon within your congregation to be, and you have on the other hand a big heart that wants to welcome everybody, how do you wrestle that? And are there really no moments where you say, like, gosh, is halakha the right way to think through this issue that's affecting the lives of these people?
So first of all, I want to address, I want to parse it. I think that
that is so rabbinical.
It's what I do. Tzvi Fischer, the rabbi. I think that the bias angle and the cultural yuck factor, if you would, like ew, all of that is definitely societal, and it's definitely out there. And we're not talking about bias in halacha. I mean, every person, regardless of who or how or what they are, we have to, it's not my judgment for anybody to treat them in any way in a negative way. Never mind what we think legally. I mean, as a libertarian, I definitely, that's I don't think the government should be involved in that. But that's not, again, I'm parsing that from my religious perspective. Bias has no place. The Mishnah tells us, don't judge another person until you are in their shoes, right? Until you get to their place. I don't have a judgment about people. I don't suppose that if I had anybody else's emotional, psychological, environmental situation. I grew up in their family. I had whatever it may be, that I would do anything different than them. So I never have and can never have a judgment of a person on a basis or a bias on that. And so everybody is a Tzelem Elokim. Everybody is a creation of Hashem. It is not mine to really do anything with other than respect and care and show the darchei noam, the ways of Torah are pleasant. That's the one angle which I think is different than looking at the abstract, not the person, but the abstract thing. To me, my struggle is trying to understand why it is, but not is it the right system? Because I think it comes from the Creator. It comes. It's Torah, from the will of the Creator, halacha, and then we have to live within that framework, within that paradigm.
Okay.
And so to me, the struggle is how to build a person up and make a person feel valued within the framework. Look, we can take it to something which I don't think is as politically charged. To me, Shabbos, as halacha says, Shabbos is equal to the entire Torah, right? That's what the Gemara says. Shabbos is equal to the entire Torah. There are many people here in this community and around the world that don't observe Shabbos at all, or observe Shabbos, but definitely not in halachic sense, or in a halachic sense, but not completely. And I don't think anybody asked the question, well, so how do you deal with a person who doesn't observe Shabbos like you?
Right.
Because I think people know the answer to that with dignity and respect. And I teach and learn with people and hope that they will learn and to connect to Shabbos in the best way they can. And I don't have a judgment on people. I don't think if I grew up in their shoes that I would do anything different, as the Mishnah says. I cannot judge anyone. I have an obligation, but also a deep sense of morality around that. So the answer, I think the parsing there is the person versus the halacha. To me, the halacha, although halacha applies differently in every scenario, the halacha comes from a place that is unchanging.
Yeah, I get it.
It is changing because it's constantly
I get
changing
it.
where and
Yeah.
how and how it applies.
Yeah,
But it comes from a place of unchanging.
Yeah.
And to me, that's
Right.
actually a source of comfort. If I had to make the choices myself, that would be an extremely excruciating thing to constantly need to decide every aspect or every issue that comes up. Instead, I'm comforted by the fact that I have something to rely on, the Torah, the mitzvah,
yeah, right.
while also recognizing I have no judgment of people. My purpose
Right.
is to learn and teach and
Yeah.
care.
Right.
And
Yeah, and
if
listen,
I think
that
something is wrong.
yeah, no, that shines through in how you relate to everybody, as I've seen, and that's a beautiful thing to behold. And clearly, that's very evident, and I wouldn't think for a minute that it would be anything otherwise. Yeah, I think there's an interesting outcome of that view, which is that Jewish communities. I mean, I think that. I don't quite know how to formulate it. I think that there is a challenge. What I wrestle with is I think that there's a challenge on the one hand being personally welcoming and affirming, right? But then recognizing that, okay, so I guess there's a couple things. One is there's the personal relationship, right? And as you beautifully said, you don't judge anybody. That could just as well be you. You don't know what you would do if you were in their shoes, and that's awesome. All we can do is show love and chesed and bring people in all the way that we can. Then there's the halacha, which I hear you're saying, look, the halacha is what it is. It's not gonna change. It comes from Hashem. It comes from God, and it's not going to change. But then there's this sort of fuzzy area of like the social realm. Like, so, on a Shabbos, if there's if there were a gay couple celebrating an anniversary, boom, we would be like dancing and holding it up and saying, this is beautiful. And I think that those are areas where I think some folks wrestle with. But let me say the challenge on the other side, that I think the limits of what I'm saying, because essentially with the implication of what I'm saying is I just feel like there are areas within the halacha where the conservative movement has taken a different position. And to be perfectly honest with you, I don't always find the halacha persuasive, right? And in particular on this issue, the teshuvah that was issued about gay marriage is actually a phenomenal work of scholarship. For those who have not read it, no matter where you come down on this issue halachically, I really urge you to read it. I think it's called Halacha and Human Dignity, but I could be wrong. But you can follow up with me if you want a copy of it. It's actually incredibly brilliant, but it's also hanging on a very thin halachic thread, in my opinion. And so, but if, let's just say the conservative movement had said, no, we're not going to allow gay people to get married, I believe that I would have just said, well, I'm sorry. I'm going to do this, because for me, it's one thing to say to people, listen, you got to observe Shabbos. No, I'm not going to tell you that you can, go to movies on Shabbos or go skiing because you find it relaxing. It is what it is. That's in a different category, because core issues of human well-being and the vital issues of love and partnership are not at stake in that. And so that's the path that I would go down. But the shortcoming of my side, I'm very well aware of. Where do you draw the line? Why do I say, well, the halakha can't fit here, but I can follow it there and there and there? So, I have a halachic system that has holes in it. And I think that's the challenge, not only of me personally, and to be honest, that's one of the reasons that I'm stepping away from the rabbinate, which it's very odd to say this to 70 people simultaneously, but hey, there you go. It's a stiff glass of water I'm drinking here. And by the way, it is water. But I also think this is an issue in the conservative movement more broadly. I do think on the practical lived level, it is not necessarily on the intellectual level of the people who are making halakha in the conservative movement, but I think in terms of how conservative rabbis are posketing for their communities, I do think that there are inconsistencies and holes, which I guess is kind of obvious. So that's the shadow side of the view I'm espousing. But what are you going to do? Okay.
Take some questions.
Yeah, let's do that. If you have questions, the best way is to send them into the chat, and then I guess Jemi, you can just tell us what they are.
I mean, these
So
were
far
all
people
very
have been
light questions.
respectfully quiet.
Yeah, well, yeah. So if folks have questions or topics you want us to address, please send them in. So let's go to something a little
These
bit
were
less.
such benign, simple questions that we've addressed them now. So people had nothing to add or nothing to ask
Right.
about. It was like simple.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know. Maybe we could even go even a little deeper. I do have some very intense places that I want to go, understanding we don't have all night. But before we do that, let's sort of take a breather. And let me just ask you, what is your go-to text when you need to like fill up your neshama? Like you're just feeling like you really want to have a beautiful learning that's going to inspire you and put your head back on straight. You have a text or a sefer?
It really depends on. I'm very moody when it comes to which text I want to go to.
Yeah.
So first of all, I'll split between a halachic text, like going to a tshuva, and when I do, then it's usually Chatam Sofer. I'm going to analyze a halachic subject matter from the beginning to the end, and a tshuva,
and why the Chatam Sofer?
I just find it brilliant. I find it clear and great analysis, and so that's often where I go.
Okay.
If I'm looking for non-halachic, so what I may call machshava, thoughts and Torah ideas, it varies. Some days I'm in the mood of something from the 12th century, so it'll probably be Rabbi Nebachieh. If I'm looking for something really modern, it may be Pachad Yitzchak from Rabbi Hutner, or Ali Shor from Rabbi Wolbe. It may be something from 200 years ago. And it would be something from Hasidic or something else. I don't have a go-to. Tell me your go-to. Let's see.
Well, first of all, I actually have a text from the Pachad Yitzchak that I was going to maybe bring up if time allows. And by the way, I love that is such a beautiful Jewish answer. You're like, if I want something more modern, the Pachad Yitzchak, which is like Jewishly so modern. But I love that. And I want to say, I know for some people on this call, like you have great fluency with Jewish texts, and for others you don't, and that's all good wherever you are. But I want to say Keith Byrne Razel Gilman is just showing us. Oh, you have the Pachad Yitzchak? Is that what you're pointing to? Okay, who knows? I can't. It's not close enough.
Oh,
Avot, right? Avot,
yes.
We should all be learning Avot right now. By the way,
I quoted it twice tonight. Yes, thank you.
Right. But I want to just say this is neither here nor there with regard to our discussion, but just for those who have not yet opened the doors of Jewish learning, I want to say that the ability to, when Rabbi Fischer said, like, I might open something from the 12th century, the ability to time travel and have a conversation with your own people about issues that were important to you, were important to them, and are still important to you, it's just supernal. Like we've probably all read really old texts, and probably everybody read the Iliad in college. But reading a text that is part of you and part of your people, and being able to time travel to different centuries is just astonishing. And so wherever your Torah learning is, to elevate it to the next level. And there are so many texts now in English, which was not the case even 10, 15 years ago. More and more and more text available in English. And anyway.
If I may shamelessly plug.
Yes.
There is an institution in town that would love to learn with you any text you want. Yes, Ari, you're laughing at me. I don't care.
Absolutely.
Yes. You are welcome to call us at any point and say, hey, I want to learn this text, or are you teaching a text that we can join? Yes,
Right.
thank you, Elaine and Jacob, for clapping about that. Yes.
Okay, so now that we're at a point where we want to learn,
Well,
we
hold on,
actually
wait,
have a
wait.
couple questions.
Wait.
Oh.
Sorry, one second. Two things. First of all, just in case there's a couple people on the call who don't know, that institution is the Kollel. That's what Rabbi Fischer, that's what he was talking about. And obviously, you know, I would love to learn with anybody on anything, but he was talking about the Kollel. And then he asked me my go-to. Sorry, Jemi, I do want to get to people's questions, but my
Not Grateful
go-to.
Dead?
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, music is a huge through line in my life, and yeah, I'm a big Dead fan. But texts are really the things that sustain me, and yeah, I'm a little bit all over the place as well. But I would say that the last it's interesting because several years ago I was very deep into Chassidut, and then I kind of made it a much lesser part of my Torah diet. And then in doing that, I started just to find such incredible richness in pshat. I think a lot of people thinking that pshat means the simple meaning, they take the English word of simple meaning of the Torah text and they misunderstand that to mean that it's not unbelievably dynamic and rich. So one thing is I'd circle back to the pshat and just trying to do the deepest dives on various teachers on the pshat. And then right now I would say my go-to text is well, I've got a couple, but Kalach Pichei Chochma, the Ramchal's book on the Kabbalah, 138 Gates of Wisdom, which is available also, by the way, in English. That's right now what's sustaining me, is really trying to do a deep dive on Kabbalah, and yeah, and let's see, what are our questions, Jemi? Take us there.
Okay, so Rabbi Rose is a short question for you, then Rabbi Fischer, there's a long question for you. So Rabbi Rose, Marilyn wants to know, what are you going to do instead if you're stepping away from being a rabbi?
Oh, I was invited to be the executive director at the Kollel, and I'm going to be stepping into that position. No, I'm just kidding. What I'll say right now is that I'm going to be looking for contexts in which I can further orient my life to Jewish learning and to Jewish teaching. And what exactly that looks like, I don't know. I'm not going to either start or work at another congregation. But I've really figured out that the thing that I really love to do, and the thing that I think I have to do, is to learn and to teach Torah. And so I'm going to be looking for various opportunities to be able to do that. So I'm not 100% sure yet what that looks like.
So if somebody wants a personal rabbi at home, you're looking for a job.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. So Rabbi Fischer, Craig asks, how do you deal with people who are more judgmental than you? In other words, I love your expression of how you personally deal with this difficult issue or people you come into contact with, but clearly many others, both on the religious side and also on the non-religious side or less religious side, do not feel that way or jump to immediate evaluations of people. How do you respond to such a person's approach or view?
So that's a great question, and as Craig points out, that's not a religious thing per se. This is something we do instinctively. We do that in politics. We judge people on their politics. We do that in culture. You know, if we are our issue is the climate. And so we see somebody drinking out of a plastic disposable water bottle, we may feel instinctively judgmental about that. If it's religious, it also comes out. People look at me, and I don't know what's the giveaway, but sometimes they are instinctively judgmental about me, that I must be judgmental of them. And I get that all the time. And people say, you know, I feel judged by you. And I said, can you give me where that came through? And said, I just feel it. And I was, you know, I don't usually say it. I said, I feel like you're judging me. And I'm not being judgmental, but you assume that about me because I'm stiff enough to wear a tie every day. but you don't do it every day.
That's true.
I mow my lawn in a tie.
That's very good.
No, but seriously, my response is that I think we tend, as human beings, we tend to do that. We look at things and we try and assess. We're constantly trying to think, and we assess. And we assess people by things they wear, and we try and categorize them and put them in a box. And they must be X or Y or Z. And it may be religious, it may be political, it may be social. It may be socio-economical. I mean, there's so many things that we do, and we make judgments about people that way. And in fact, sometimes they're really negative in this, and that's really one of the issues that we started with today, which is our response to Black people. That sometimes people just instinctively feel afraid, and that is an issue that we don't like to talk about, we don't like to look at, and that's something that that we're really waking up to. And we do that without getting any deeper into that. We do that instinctively. Human beings assess each other. And when it comes down to religious issues, we assess each other as well. And the Mishnah teaches us, instructs us, thank you for pointing that out, Razel. The Mishnah in Avot tells us, don't judge someone until you've reached their point. Meaning, you cannot know that you would do any different if you were in that particular person's life. And that's the instruction. Do we live by that all the time? No. Do I live by that all the time? No. There's a line that says, don't walk, people say, walk a mile in my shoes, and then you won't judge me. I said, don't walk a mile in my shoes, walk 1 minute in my head, right? You know what's going on in my head. So I'm constantly evaluating myself, or I'm trying to evaluate myself and say, am I responding well? Is this the right thing? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? But instinctively, I think we instinctively assess each other, sometimes negatively.
Thank you. There's a question from Sean to both rabbis. Is it possible that some laws are more and less or less relevant at different moments in time, or are all laws absolutely relevant at all times?
Yeah, that is a really great question. I mean, I think I don't know that I'm the rabbi to give the more interesting answer on this, only because in some ways I've already exposed my own perspective on certain arenas of halakha having to do, when we were talking about how gay men and women are treated in the halakha. But I will say that there is, already like a kind of intuitive hierarchy of the halakha, which doesn't necessarily exist on a theoretical level, but everybody knows, like when you're reading through the Torah, one way to look at it is you can look at the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 Commandments, and say, well, the 10 Commandments clearly have a certain status that other laws don't. But even that's not really that's not a perfect way to approach the question, because of the fact that all of the laws of the Torah seem to come from the Aseret HaDibrot. But then if you, let's say, for example, the commandment against murder on the one hand, and then the laws having to do with shatnez on the other, with certain fabrics that we can't wear together. It's clear that there's always going to be more emphasis on the law that has to do with, on the law prohibiting murder, than on shatnez and any number of other laws. So I believe that there already is a sort of experiential hierarchy that's developed over time, just by natural practice and common sense. But on the theoretical level, I imagine Rabbi Fischer's answer is going to be that all of the laws are relevant, except, I guess the ones you could say pertaining to the temple at this moment in time are not, they're relevant, but they're not alive. They're not active.
Yeah, thank you. They are alive, but not relevant, many of them. but to your point, I think there is a hierarchy. It's interesting. This morning, I teach a weekly class on Talmud called Daf HaShavua, 1 page of Talmud a week, and we happen to begin this week the discussion when a positive thing to do, a mitzvah to do, coincides concurrently with a negative mitzvah or a prohibition, and that the mitzvah supersedes the prohibition, and when that applies, and the teaching of Ramban on that is that the positive mitzvahs are the mitzvahs to engage in come from a place of love of Hashem, the willingness to do something positive, and the negative commandments, meaning the prohibitions, are really a place of fear, meaning I don't want to step out of bounds, not fear of retribution per se, but fear of maintaining a certain structure, maintaining the halacha, maintaining the lines. And love of Hashem and the living out of love is going to supersede and comes and overpowers that negative one. So the mitzvah aseh, the positive mitzvah, supersedes the negative one. So there are times that certain halachot within the structure of halacha itself says, well, here's a place that you should not apply this. Here's a place that you should apply it. So there are definitely times when laws are not absolute in as much as that they don't apply. They don't. Here is where the Torah itself or halacha itself says it needs to be set aside for preserving a life, even potentially preserving a life. We've abandoned minyan for 3 months now, essentially, for the possibility of preserving life. Many halachot like that. So I think the halachic structure itself deals with not some halachot, some laws not being relevant at some times, but that is its relevance itself. So it's alive in as much as it's not to be applied.
Right.
Thank you. So
Nice.
yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
more Rabbi Rose?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so Brad has an observation that will lead into a question. He says, I fear that the divisions in Judaism of recent times may soon have Judaism coming apart at some point in the future. It may be unrecognizable from its origins. This is oversimplified, but I hope you understand the concern. How would you address that?
All right, next question.
Well, then, of course,
no, I was kidding.
you have online classes, so.
Yeah, I think that is a hugely important question that Brad just asked. And, I also want to say that with regard to this question, we're in a little bit of a bubble here in Portland, because I think that there's such I don't know, friendly relationships, personal relationships among the rabbis, between the conservative rabbis, reform rabbis, the Orthodox rabbis, and everybody, and that does not happen in every city. I think that I do not know the answer to this, because I don't think that there can be an answer in which some Jews are asked to forego their principles about their belief and others are not. This is not going to work, right? No one's going to say to Rabbi Fischer, well, listen, if you guys would just stop worrying about kashrut, you could have all these, families over from the other side of town, and they could drive to your house on Shabbos, and you could drive to their house on Shabbos, and people would get to know each other. So the problem is you, Rabbi Fischer. And
I'm sorry, this is who I am.
Right. And for somebody to say to me, well, actually, I'm not the right example, but if somebody to say to a Jew who's not observant of the halacha, that you have to accept the halacha as binding on your life, and then once you do that, you can have, then you can break down the barriers, right? I don't think that the answer is in that, and I don't think that we're at the point where there is such a thing as an integration of the two worlds, at least at this moment. And maybe in the times of Mashiach and down, in some other way, somebody will come up with a way that we can bind different Jews together in some global intellectual framework, like a grand unified theory of Judaism. But that's not the end of it. That's the beginning of it. So I think we begin by we begin by affirming our differences and recognizing that they exist, and then approaching one another with a very, very deep, compassionate curiosity, right? And too often Jews, out of their own either insecurities or pain that they've experienced in the past, move right into the judgment that Rabbi Fischer was talking about, and it happens in both directions. You know, as Rabbi Fischer said, he's been the victim of being judged by people who assume a whole set of beliefs that he may have, which he probably doesn't. And so I think that the challenge is for us to approach one another with curiosity and with kavod. And the curiosity is not simply tell me about you personally, but it's also, I would say, in part, the curiosity has to extend to wanting to spend time together, right? The greatest periods of growth and ferment in my life as a Jew was when I was just hanging out with a lot of Orthodox Jews and spending time in that way. It shaped me massively. I didn't walk away as an Orthodox Jew, but it had a huge impact in how I think about the world, and it really transformed me. And so one thing is, I think, experiencing, spending time together, Jews actually spending time together who are not alike. And then the other thing, I would say there are two more things. The other thing is for the curiosity also to be intellectual, right? So one is experiential, being with one another, getting to know one another, seeing how we live one another's lives. And then the other is intellectual. So it could be, if you're an Orthodox Jew and there's somebody who you know who doesn't practice like you, or they drive to shul on Shabbos, maybe they drive to shul on Shabbos because they've never thought about it. But maybe this is a Jew who actually has read a lot of theology and or has a lot of other reasons that inform their practice. Curiosity and literacy about one another's worldview, I think, is another essential part. And I think that the other thing that I would say is that every Jew across the board has to then increase not only their literacy about one another, but has to increase their Jewish literacy. I think that if Jews want to come together around something, Jewish learning, I mean, unsurprisingly, you know, coming from a rabbi, Jewish learning has to be at the center of our project. I think that that's the one through line. And it doesn't necessarily mean the study of Gemara or the study of Chassidut. There's a lot of Jewish writing about Jewish peoplehood and about Jewish culture. Certainly, I gravitate towards traditional Jewish learning, but I think that Jews being willing to engage their own past through texts will give a context for us to engage each other. And then maybe the following Shabbos, there's no way we can hang out together because that person doesn't drive on Shabbos and that person, keeps kosher in a different way. But it doesn't have to be around the core religious commitments. But I think literacy with one another and shared literacy about our own past and our core texts has to be the foundation. And then the last thing I'll say, and I guess then I want to hear Rabbi Fischer, your thoughts. That I guess implicit in Brad's beautiful question is the idea that we all have an obligation. We have an obligation to take affirmative steps to try to create unity in the ways that we can and not just get into our own little silos.
Thank you. So first of all, I want to say I wholeheartedly agree that one of the issues that facing world Jewry and American Jewry is that we have moved away from being people of the book. So many people are very, really have no knowledge about Jewish texts, about Jewish learning, about Judaism other than gefilte fish. And it's a really hard commitment to make in life only based on gefilte fish. It's not all that good, right? So there's a lot of Yiddishkeit. A lot of people's Judaism is lost due to a lack of knowledge. And so the imperative, I think, the highest imperative nowadays is really to become familiar, to learn with other people, with people that don't necessarily think exactly like you, and learn Torah and learn the texts and become familiar with our history. And so I really think that's important. While I also see what you're seeing, Rabbi, that people are in their silos and people are see things in their own way. However, Brad, I'm not so sure that this is really the worst we've ever had in the divisions. 150 years ago, it was much worse. And 1,100 years ago, it was worse. The Karaites and the breaking away. And then you had, during Talmudic times, you had so many splinter groups. And we're here. We're here in Portland, Oregon, talking Torah. So
Right.
I believe, and it's a firm part of my connection to Torah and my belief in Torah, is that we're eternal people. We have withstood many attempts to annihilate us, both from external and from internal splintering and internal lack of Torah, a connection and lack of knowledge of what we are, and yet we're here. So I don't share the fear of Judaism going away. Will it be unrecognizable? Sure, I don't think so. But I do think that we are bleeding so many of our young people, so many Jews who have no connection and don't feel a connection. I remember several years ago when Meira Spivak, who was running a Jewish student club in a high school, and asked the student, said, "Are you Jewish?" And she said, "No, but my parents are." And that was so painful to hear, that a young teenager knows that her parents are Jewish and had no sense that that was something to her, that she was Jewish.
Yeah.
And we're losing so many people to apathy. We're losing so many people to lack of knowledge, to lack of connection. And to me, that's a much greater concern than that the Judaism we have won't look the same because of different people doing it differently.
Right.
Much more important is, to me, is sit down, learn about it, know what it is you are doing and know what it is that you're not doing. Make Torah central to your Judaism, and wherever it is and however it is, and then that'll inform you. That'll bring you a great sense of inner strength in a Jewish connection. So to me, that's an important thing. Again, shameless plug. Portland Kollel. Fun with you.
The one thing that I think is interesting is that in some ways I think that in the middle of the 20th century, there were huge ideological battle lines that were drawn, and between the movements, and those were not illusions. Like they stood for real things, but it was, I think, very difficult for people to see each other across those lines, and I think that I don't think describes the current Jewish world. Not only in a friendly place like Portland, but I think, at least within the United States, I can't speak so much to other countries. It seems like, though obviously the ideological differences are still there seems to be much more interest among all the Jews I know of all ages, but certainly among younger Jews, about engaging in and dialoguing with and addressing the similar challenges as Jews from across the ideological spectrum. And there's a great opening there. And then the other thing I'll say, and I don't want this to sound rancorous, because it's addressed to, in some ways, it's a reflection of the Jewish Portland that no longer exists, but just to talk about for a moment about how important it is that we deal with one another with such decency and such goodness, and that we always extend kindness and understanding. there was a point in my father's career, I think it was in the 70s, when he really took a lot of grief from some Orthodox rabbis. And those were deeply, deeply painful and traumatizing to my father. Traumatizing is a bit of a strong word, but what I mean by that is he held on to those wounds for a long time. And I don't want to get specific because I don't want to, I don't want to stir the pot, but there were a little bit of name calling and some stuff that was deeply wounding my father. And what's significant about it is that it was very hard for my father to let go of that pain. And that in turn affected his working relationship that might have been something else over time, had those wounds not been there. It made it harder for him to embrace other folks. This is prehistory, before you and before me, Rabbi Fischer, going way back. But my larger point is just that you don't know when you make a little comment to somebody, or you look askance at somebody's practice or their ignorance or what they're wearing or whatever it is, especially in people's religious lives. People's hearts are so wide open and vulnerable that those wounds can really deeply penetrate and really, in some cases, guide people away from what might be a greater movement towards Torah or a greater unity. So we have to be very, very careful with our words. I actually want to sort of round third base here. I could actually do this all night. I mean, I'm totally loving life, but I want to recognize that other folks may have other things that they have to do this evening. So I'm going to move us towards the end with a kind of a doozy of a topic. You mentioned the Pachad Yitzchak earlier, and there's a little bit of Pachad Yitzchak that I'll just share with you where it's from, because it's so stunning that you'll want to read it later if you don't already know it. And it's from his take on Sukkot, Mamar 19. So you can sort of make a mental note of that, Rabbi Fischer. You might want to check it out later. But the Pachad
19?
Yeah, 19, Sukkot, Mamar 19. And it's just absolutely stunning. And what he does is he starts with, so the broad topic here is I guess, despair and pessimism. When we look out into the world or our lives and we just see real pain and difficulty, and all of us have moments of doubt. So I just want to I'm not going to at all try to talk about the whole text, but I'll just throw out the topic. Essentially, he talks about this Baraita from the Talmud Eruvin. And he says, he quotes the story that the debate between Shammai and Hillel as to whether it would have been better for human beings to not have been created. So again, this is not the Pachad Yitzchak. The Talmud itself says, Noach lo adam shelo nivra yoter mishenivra. So the question is, would it have been better? And we can at another time talk about why that might not be the best translation. But would it have been better for people to not have been created than to have been created? Right? It's a stunning question, right? And he recognizes, the Pachad Yitzchak recognizes, and don't worry, I'm going to try to turn this into a question. He recognizes the power of the question, because it's when human beings are created, right? What are we told when human beings are created? This is very good. And so how can it be, the Pachad Yitzchak wants to know, that the rabbis ever asked the question, would it have been better for us not to have been created? How can that even be in the Gemara? And if we think about that question, I will just say, like, sometimes in looking out at the world, I say, what good are human beings bringing into the world? Like, how much suffering and brutality and destruction have we brought into the world? And if we took the balance of humanity, would we say that, like, in general, things are moving in a good direction? A couple hundred years ago, people thought we were definitely moving towards, like, the apex of humanity, but who can look back now over the 20th century and all that we've seen and say that it's just obvious that we're, like, moving in the right direction? So Rabbi Hutner taps into that Baraita to talk about that sense, the angst in the 20th century, which is his context, that brings us up against the most difficult questions about the meaning and the purpose of our lives. There you go. Beautiful. And well, yeah, I brought it up. You mentioned it earlier. And essentially what he says, and Rabbi Fischer, this is where I want to get your take. Essentially what he says is he does not say, well, the rabbis didn't really mean that, and they actually meant this. He says that that is a real weight that we have, that we carry with us, that there is a religious value to our having that deepest and most profound question. What might it have been better for human beings not to have been created? That is, have we established such spiritual darkness and such agony that maybe we shouldn't have been created? It almost seems like he's saying for us not to ask that question means we're not paying attention. And he goes on to resolve it in a particularly beautiful and brilliant way. But before we talk about that, let me just ask you, how do you wrestle spiritually with darkness and doubt? Not necessarily doubt about, the Torah's origins, that kind of stuff we didn't really talk about tonight, but just spiritually speaking, the question of whether there's really goodness at the heart of the world and whether human beings have what it takes to bring that goodness out. What do you do with those moments religiously?
So on the ultimate goodness, I'm very fortunate. You mentioned your father and the effect he had. I'm very fortunate to be the grandchild of my grandmother of blessed memory, Miriam Fischer. And she passed away at the age of 93 just a year ago. An unbelievable personality. Her belief in the goodness of the life she's granted by Hashem. And she was a Holocaust survivor, went through tremendous difficulty. The most noble, regal person I can imagine in the world. And the belief in ultimate goodness in every person and in every moment is something I inherited by just being in her presence. So I have a very deep belief in that ma'at mina or harba min hachosher, a little bit of light can diffuse so much darkness, and there is so much light. There is so much goodness, even in the darkest moments. A phrase I like to say from her is, behind every dark cloud, the sun is shining ever so brightly. And it is so necessary to always know goodness will prevail. The tov is emerging. The goodness is there. There's or. But on an individual level, that struggle is there on a constant basis. Always, am I doing the right thing? Is this what I need to be doing? Am I fulfilling? Have I serviced someone today, this month, this year? Is there any value? I'm a human with struggles like everyone else, and struggle about myself. And the continuation of that discussion is in Noach lo la'adam shenivra yochel mishelo nivra. Is it better for a person to be created or not? The end of that is, therefore, yefashpesh b'ma'asav. A person has to constantly self-evaluate. Am I actually bringing? Am I a part of the problem, or am I bringing light? Am I adding or am I adding chosha?
Right.
Light or darkness. Right. Am I doing good? Am I bringing goodness to the world? And I'd love to say that I am a perfect human, but I'm not. I'm really a struggling person like everyone else.
Mm-hmm. And so, right, I didn't finish the Baraita. So what the Baraita says is it's just so beautifully Jewish. It's like, it would have been better perhaps for us not to have been created, but here we are. Now that we're created, all we can do is, examine ourselves and understand ourselves and try to elevate ourselves, which is such a great Jewish answer, although very deeply profound as well. But so Rabbi, so if I understand you, you're saying that for you, the question is sort of an inward looking question as to you personally examining yourself, but it's not a kind of broader spiritual, philosophical darkness, so to speak, that you wrestle with in the world. Like, you're not really asking that question, would it have been better for us not to have been created?
Not Us as in you? No. Us as in me? Yes.
Yeah,
That
I see.
I see it. I see it as a very. I see the world only emerging constantly to a greater place and a greater place. With, I mean, there are setbacks. Like everything that goes has some drops as it continues to go up, and I don't think that we don't notice those. But I think overall, things are getting better. And the guiding hand of history is guiding it to in capital G there, guiding hand is guiding it to a better place always.
Wow. So, well, I'll let you read the Mamar. It's completely brilliant, and you know, it's obviously the Pachad Yitzchak believes that you know that ultimately the answer is known. We know that it's good for us to be here, but the importance of the question and the tentative pessimism to ask the question, I think he sees as in and of itself being of religious value. And maybe it's precisely because it guides us towards asking ourselves, you know, am I doing the right thing? Am I living in the right way? I would say for me, and then I guess we'll see if there are any concluding remarks either that folks have that they want to send in, or Rabbi Fischer, I'll give you the last word. You know, this is really where my learning, where my study of Kabbalah, I find that I'm leaning more and more on it. And what I want to say for people who have not learned the Kabbalah is that in some ways Kabbalah, for a number of reasons, has gotten sort of a bad reputation in popular circles as being this sort of like lightweight, new agey thing that people turn to because they're bored with regular religion. And to some extent, that's, you know, there's maybe some truth to it. But the reason that people in the 20th century who wouldn't normally have studied this, because of course it's been studied continuously in Jewish life forever, but the reason that it's gained popularity, I think, is because it addresses some of these fundamentally important questions of modernity. And for me, what the Kabbalah affirms is that indeed the world was created in a kind of vacuum, a spiritual vacuum of absence, of nothingness, that it appears to us as though God is absent, as though there is nothing. We have that experience of anxiety, and those who learned with me on Shavuot will recognize some of what I'm talking about here. There is that anxiety of looking into a world that feels disordered and overcome with chaos sometimes, and that gives rise to doubts about the very meaning of our existence and whether we can possibly make the world better. But the Kabbalah also asserts that there is the thinnest thread of divine light, even within that vacuum, that void, and because it's so thin and so it becomes very, very hard to see, but it is there, and therefore it's ultimately guaranteed, according to the Kabbalah, that the world will move in a better direction. And I would say, in order to do that, though, in order for that to happen, it requires for us to have faith. And this will be my last line here. For me, faith is not, the way that I look at this question is that faith is not an issue of belief. I have to insist that I believe that X, Y, and Z is possible, or even what the Kabbalah says is true, but rather emunah in the sense of faithfulness, that I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep doing what I can do, as you said, to examine myself, to look at my own deeds, to see how I can be the best kind of person, and just insisting that matters to do that. And that in doing that is where we actually will then find the light and be inspired to do the good that we can do. I want to give up the floor now, either to see if there are any last minute questions. I don't think this is the time to answer any of the hugest questions about the meaning of life, but if there are any last moment ones, and if not, and I don't think there are.
We got a couple, Rabbi, just some short ones.
Okay.
Just earlier, Michelle was asking about online classes. I know that we've been, pushing, Kollel and talking about Daf Yomi and talking about other options. So I've put the websites for both Kollel and for Shari Torah in the chat. We're easy to find. Both organizations have online learning offerings, especially right now where we're all virtual. So please go there. And then Kate was asking about with Jewish literacy, if you can just have a book. I know you can cite lots of books, but maybe a book or two that springs to mind that helps with Jewish literacy
Yeah,
or that would improve.
yeah.
I would, go ahead, Rob.
No, go for it.
I would suggest to anybody that wants a good book on Jewish literacy is Aryeh Kaplan's book called The Handbook to Jewish Thought. It's a 2-volume handbook to Jewish thought. It's small nuggets, and it really is fundamental. And it will give you a very well-rounded 101 on Torah literacy.
Beautiful.
Also,
Well,
yes,
Basil's
Tulichkin's
holding
Jewish
up
literacy is
Tulichkin's,
good, right?
yeah.
Yeah, Tulichkin's
Right.
Jewish literacy.
And my answer to that would be, look, it is important to round out your Jewish literacy and to like have an overview of belief or Jewish history and those, there's a number of titles, but I would say the very best way is to sort of follow your bliss. What I mean by that is, what are you curious about? Like, you want to know more about mitzvah, or do you want to know about like what do Jews believe about being, connecting to God? Sort of narrow your question a little bit, and then reach out to a rabbi, and then find a title that resonates with something you're just genuinely curious about. So gam v'gam on this one. Do both of those things, and you'll be in good shape.
Thank you, Rabbi. So I just want to jump in for those who can't see the chat or who are listening by phone. Earlier in the conversation, when the rabbis were addressing Brad's question, Cliff wrote in a beautiful observation, just saying the magic of the Jewish religion is that there are so many opinions. There is no right answer to this question, but continued exploration and curiosity. And I just thought it was nice to share that for those who can't read it.
Nice. That's beautiful. That's Cliff Hockley. I love that idea. And that's absolutely true. It's been reflected here tonight. Rabbi Fischer, I'm going to give you the last word in a minute, but I mostly want to thank you so much. Great conversation, as I knew it would be. Love talking to you about this stuff. I love your menschlichkeit and just your wisdom. I want to thank everybody for taking time out. This series will continue. I'm going to be meeting with Rabbi Deborah Kolodny, who's a wonderful rabbi, very wise in her own way, very, very knowledgeable person. She and I are going to be doing a similar thing, although I'm guessing the tone and tenor will be a little bit different. And she stands just a little bit to Rabbi Fischer's theological left. But in any event, I hope you can join me for that. Actually, at the moment, I've forgotten the date, but it's coming up in a couple of weeks. You can look at our website. Again, Rabbi Fischer, thank you, and I will give you the last word. Anything you want to close with?
I want to thank everyone for showing up, and especially those that turned their screen on, their camera on, so I can see you. I haven't seen you all in so long, and it's really nice to see you. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about really deep and important things that I think are so core to who we are.
Thank you. All right, everybody, have a great night. Thank you so much. And thank you to Jemi, the executive director of Sherry Torah, for making this all go so well. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.
To do. And just so the conversation with Rabbi Kolodny is on Monday, June 22nd at 5:30 p.m. And if you registered for this, you should be able to have registered for that too, but double check, go back to our website and click.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Can I take this tie off, Rabbi?
Thank you.
Can I put my jacket back on?
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you. Good night.